Hello, so we are moving on to chapter 9, which will finish up our exploration of the Olympian gods with the last sort of Olympian god to join the club, and that was Dionysus. There's a myth that um, when Dionysus wanted to join, that Hestia gave up her spot at that point to welcome the new god. So we're going to be looking at Dionysus. The theoretical lens we're going to look at this time is going to look at rituals that invert things. So rituals of inversion as opposed to rituals of elevation. Right? Rituals of elevation, you go through the trial, you come out changed for the better, changed in any event, and you're different, and you re-enter society in your new phase, whether that be as a soldier, as an adult, as a married person. Rituals of inversion do not do that. They sort of throw things into a topsy-turvy situation, but then things return to normal. Um, the comparison section, we're going to look at a poem by Catullus, poem 63, which deals with the figure of Attis and the cult of Cybele, who of course would have a connection with Dionysus, as they are both associated with the East. And then we're going to look at the Nachleben section here, which looks at Dionysus and the figure of Dracula in Bram Stoker's novels, and especially in popular culture after that. So, Dionysus has close connections to human beings, closer than any of the other gods. Hermes is probably the next closest, but Dionysus is all about presence. The idea is that when you are worshiping Dionysus, you are in the actual presence of the god, which doesn't remind the other gods. Apollo and Zeus would be good examples. They're marked by distance. You're praying to a god far off to help you, but you don't actually interact with the deity. Whereas in the case of Dionysus, by drinking and participating in the ritual, in a sense, Dionysus is there with you. Right? So that's a different way of looking at things. And of course, it explains some of the popularity of the worship of Dionysus. According to the myth, the main myth, there's more than one myth about Dionysus and his birth. His mother was a Theban princess named Semele. Zeus had sex with Semele and had a sort of relationship over a period of time. And Hera disguised herself as one of Semele's servants and basically suggested that the person she was having the sexual relationship with, who claimed to be Zeus, wasn't really Zeus, and that she really needed to make him prove it. And of course, she gets him to swear an oath by the river Styx that he will show himself, that he will do something for her, whatever she asks. He makes that oath, and then she says, well, what I want is I want to see you in your divine form. He tries to beg off, but she says, look, you promised. So he says, okay. When he shows himself in his divine form, it's basically lightning sort of personified, and she is burnt to a crisp. He manages to rescue the fetus and sews it into his thigh, and then 9 months later, out pops baby Dionysus from his thigh. The Orphic cult, this cult based on the figure of Orpheus, the Orphic cult had a different story. In their story, Dionysus is called Zagreus, but he is he is that god, so he's got a different name, Zagreus. And Zagreus in that account is born. He is the child of Zeus and Persephone, Kore. The Titans are basically sent by Hera. They sort of tear apart. They basically kill and tear apart baby Dionysus. Zeus zaps them with the lightning bolt. He then takes the heart of baby Dionysus, swallows it, and then impregnates Semele, and he is born again as a sort of hybrid human god. Now, the Titans, the ash of the Titans, is then used to create humans in the Orphic cult, and that symbolizes that humans are both base, but they also have the spark of the divine, represented by the parts of Dionysus that they ingested. And one of the things in the rituals of Dionysus, there's a lot of dismemberment going on in Dionysiac worship. Pentheus gets dismembered, and to some extent, he's a god associated with grapes and with the vineyards, and you basically dismember the vines, right, to get the grapes, and the vines, of course, will come back, right? They're sort of seasonal. They'll come back if they're taken care of, but there is this sense of like dismembering, and then you take the grapes to make wine. You basically crush the grapes, which again sort of could be seen as a form of dismemberment. So Dionysus is associated with viticulture, with the growing grapes, with wine, and with fertility. He's also the god of theater, and Dionysus is a god of masks, right? He may be present in a ritual, but he doesn't show his true form. He is disguised usually as one of the worshippers or as some other creature that happens to be there. One of the things that would happen in some rituals of Dionysus is you would have something like a drumming circle. There'd be wild music going on, and there would be a goat. And the goat, of course, when this wild music's going on, the goat's going to start to act funky. Right? It's going to start getting a little bit crazy and wig out. When that happens, because they've been praying for Dionysus to come, they would then say, Dionysus is here. They would then attack the goat, tear the goat to pieces, and then eat some of its raw flesh as a sort of form, like a bloody form of communion. That also ties to the dismemberment thing. It also ties to this idea of a type of communion and with the god. Dionysus is a god associated with mystery cults, as is Persephone, right? So gods that have something to do with the growing cycle seem to lend themselves to mystery cults. So here we have a black figure vase showing Dionysus. On either side of him are two satyrs. Then there are maenads. These are the wild women who worship Dionysus. And then there's more satyrs on the outside. Dionysus oversees both agricultural and human fertility. That's again not uncommon, that the god of fertility of the farm is also the fertility of animal and human life. St. Augustine, who grew up pagan, became a Christian, refers to the liquid seeds, right? The Dionysus in the wines that represents liquid seeds, and thereby tying into the planting idea, but also this idea that you're ingesting the deity. There was a festival in Athens. One of the festivals to Dionysus was called the Anthesteria, the flower festival. Day one was called the Pythoigia, which means the jar opening. And they would have these large jars of wine. These would be these clay jars. They would have a waxen seal on top of them. That seal would be broken, and the wine would be ladled out, and then people would drink it. The opening of the jars, because the jars could also be used as a way of storing ashes or even a dead body if the jar is large enough. They were sometimes used for burial purposes. So the idea of opening the jars is also similar to the idea of opening up maybe the graves, and the ghosts of the dead of Athens are sort of expected to be part of this festival. The second day was called the Coes, which means the wine jugs, and it involved a drinking contest. Basically, the people who participated in the contest. I mean, not everyone participated in the contest, but those who participated in the contest were given something like a 2 liter, big gulp of wine. And the drinking contest took place in absolute silence. Now, the way the Greeks saw drinking is you drank at parties called symposia, drinking, which means just drinking parties, and you would talk about something. Right? You may talk about entertainment, you might talk about sports, you might talk about all sorts of things, but you would talk about something. And so the conviviality of the party is, represented by the fact that you might be dancing and you're also talking. But in this drinking contest, absolute silence was maintained. So all they're doing is sitting there drinking. There was also a procession to a shrine of Dionysus, which was in this marshy area of Athens. That shrine was only open on this one night, this second night of the Anthesteria festival. The rest of the time was closed. So again, this is a bit topsy-turvy. This is a temple that ordinarily is not open. It's open on this one night. It's not located where temples generally are located. It takes place at night, not during the day like most rituals and festivals do. So all of those are sort of topsy-turvy. That you're having a drinking contest in total silence. The third day was called the Kitroi, the pots, and in this, some sort of honeyed oatmeal mix was made, and then this was eaten by people, but it was also offered. Some of it was offered to the spirits of the dead to basically get them to go back to the underworld, right? So and they would pray to Hermes to escort them on that trip back. There was on that third day, there was some sort of sacred marriage that took place between the priest of Dionysus and some woman. So you have some sort of sexual thing going on that sort of represents the union of Dionysus with the community. And there was this thing in honor of a worshiper of Dionysus who ended up getting killed, and his daughter then, distraught by this, hanged herself. And so there was a festival where girls would swing on swings, and that sort of symbolized this act of this woman, who hanged herself for her dead father. Here we have a woman there with the crown pushing a girl on the swing, and the girl looks just like the older woman, except she's much smaller and therefore is a kid. So this clearly alludes to this festival. The events of the Anthesteria illustrate many features of Dionysus. There's the association with wine, with fertility, because you have the drinking part. You have the sexual union of the priest and the female figure who's sort of chosen as sort of the queen of the festival. There is a confusion of things are topsy-turvy, right? We had the ritual of at that one temple that took place at night, and that only happened once a year on that night, which is unusual. You had the idea of the dead were hanging out with the living during this festival. That's all sort of different than the norm. So Dionysus is seen as a destabilizing figure in communities, which would also be why communities don't want him, right? Because political figures, right, they want their city to run smoothly. Dionysus represents instability, and so that's not a good thing. Rock and roll had this effect in the 50s when it first came. There were a lot of communities which would not allow you to like stores couldn't sell rock and roll. there was no real way to stop kids from listening to rock and roll, but it was definitely frowned upon. And then gradually that becomes sort of the, like fairly tame compared to later forms of rock. Now, the symposium was a drinking party. It literally means drinking together. Sim, together, posi is the drinking part. What would happen here is that someone would, it's a group of guys, so let's say 8 guys, decide to have a symposium. They get together at someone's house, or they get together at some public spot, and they roll dice, or the equivalent of dice, to determine who is going to be the king of the symposium. That person is the one who determines the ratio of water to wine. Greek wine was concentrate wine, so you always watered it down at least a little bit. Obviously, if you wanted to have a sober discussion over something and just wanted the wine to sort of relax you, then you would water it down quite a bit. If, on the other hand, you really wanted to get hammered, you would water it down a little. And the king of the drinking was the one who determined that ratio. This was an opportunity for men to examine their world, engage in self-examination. There were drinking cups, which were more like sort of bowls that have on them eyes. And so as you were drinking, you'd be looking at these eyes. And so in a sense, that might be an incentive for you to think about yourself, like you're looking in a mirror. Satyrs are goat men. They're goat from the waist down, and they've got goat horns, but they're human looking from the waist up. They represent animal and human sort of combined. They obviously are, categories here are meaningless if you have guys who are partly goat. The Maenads are the female worshippers, literally means like the mad women, and they are driven from their normal subservient role, in patriarchy. They basically get some days off where they get to let their hair down and basically have a wild time. And so here we've got men dancing. The flute player is a woman, but the others are men who are dancing. And this might very well indicate a symposium, one where maybe the wine portion was a bit stronger. Dionysus is the patron god of theater. Now, this is, of course, an Athenian thing. Athens is the city that developed comedy and tragedy. It spread, but it remained pretty much an Athenian art form, and that makes sense. Athens was a democracy, and in a democratic system, what you do is you hear from different sides on any issue, and then you make a decision, right? So instead of like Homer, where you've got an omniscient narrator presenting the story, here you've got opposing points of view which might not agree at all, and then you have to determine what the answer is, or what the best answer is, the way democracy works. There were, actors wore masks when they performed. Partly this was because all the parts in any given play were performed by 3 actors only. So if you have only 3 actors who have speaking roles, then you're going to have more than 3 roles generally. And so what you do is, a mask, of course, is a quick way to change, right? In this scene, so-and-so is Pentheus. In this other scene, it's the same person might be playing Agave, his mother, right? So that way, both roles can be played by the same actor. The costumes, of course, were also something fabulous, and especially in comedy, they could be outlandish. Aristophanes has a play called The Birds, where the chorus are made up of birds, and each bird has a different costume depending on what type of bird they are. So there's a robin, there's a crow, there's a hoopoe, right? There are different birds in the chorus, and of course they are going to be attired differently. They're going to have different masks, but they're also going to be wearing different outfits, which would be very expensive, but it would also be very eye-catching. Now, tragedy generally dealt with the mythological thing seriously, and oftentimes it had a sad ending. Comedy is silly and has a happy ending. Satyr plays are mythological burlesques. So they take a mythological story, but they treat it comically because the chorus are made up of satyrs. So the chorus are guys dressed up as goats, probably with a limp, gigantic phallus hanging between their legs. And as they dance, of course, that bounces around and it makes it seem even sillier. Now, there were 3 festivals in Athens that had some dramatic competitions: the Lanaia, the country Dionysia, and the city Dionysia, also called the Greater Dionysia. Now, most of the plays we have were performed at the city Dionysia. Some of the comedies of Aristophanes that we have were performed at the Lanaia festival. The country Dionysia does seem to have had some sort of dramatic competitions, but I don't think they were competitive dramatic competitions like the Lanaia or the city Dionysia. But to be honest, I don't know that much about the country Dionysia. According to Maurizio here, Aristophanes, the Acarnanians was performed at the country Dionysia, and that may be. That is the oldest play we have by Aristophanes. Acarnania is a neighborhood of Athens, and so this is sort of a comic burlesque on those people, the people from that neighborhood. At this festival in honor of Dionysus, there would be some sort of phallic procession that may have happened more at the country Dionysia than the city, but you basically had like something like the equivalent of a float in a parade, but here you've got a float with a gigantic log representing the phallus. Here is a picture of the Theater of Dionysus on the Acropolis. It's on the side of the Acropolis. It would have near perfect acoustics, or would have it when it was actually operational. And so if you were in the center of that flat area, which is called the orchestra, this is the dancing area where the chorus dances. Behind it is the scene building, which is the stage that actors would be on. Within the orchestra, at least, actors speaking even at a whisper could be heard at the back of the theater. So the fact that it's dug into a hillside provides sort of an acoustic, sweet spot for the sound. And here is the sort of float supported by guys, right? They're carrying a platform on which there's a guy with a gigantic phallus. And I'm assuming this is a statue, since he is so much bigger than the other figures. And it looks like the phallus here has like a dog's head. The city Dionysia was a week-long celebration in Athens. It seems to have taken place at the end of what we would call March, the beginning of April. So again, it's early spring. Dionysus' cult title here was Eleutherius, which might allude to the village of Eleutheria, which is near Athens. But Eleutherus means free as well, so this is a Dionysus as the freer. One of the Roman names for Dionysus was Liber, which again means the liberator, or the one who makes you free. The performances were performed by males. There's strong evidence that the audience was probably male and that there weren't women in the audience. This is a public thing, and remember, men control the public space in Athens. So we don't know for sure that there were no women in the audience. We do know that there weren't any actresses. There were male actors only. They would be playing male and female roles. The mask, of course, helps in this regard. And actors, when they are in a part, they are free from their daily identity, right? So it is a form of possession, as if they are possessed by the god or possessed by this character and enacting that story, right? So they are literally outside themselves, ecstasis or ecstasy. And that is, of course, also the effect of Dionysus, right? If you drink enough wine, you are not your normal self, right? It inhibits, it sort of, gets rid of a lot of the inhibitions that you have that keep you doing things according to convention. When you get drunk, you're not following those conventions. The worship of Dionysus seems to have had some mystery cult, connections or aspects. Mystery cults are not tied to any city, so they're not political. They're sort of apolitical. If you think of the worship of Demeter at Eleusis, it's near Athens. It's 14 miles away from Athens, and it's under Athenian sort of control. But anyone who spoke Greek could go to it, and in fact, even when Athens was at war with Sparta, Spartans could come to that festival without fear of being arrested or attacked. There is usually some sort of initiation that you go through. In other words, this is not like the Catholic Mass or a Christian service where anyone can basically attend. Now, technically in the Catholic Mass, if you're not a Catholic, you're not supposed to participate in communion. There are certain things you're not supposed to do, but they also don't check IDs at the door to make sure that you're Catholic, right? So, but anyway, all the stuff's out there for people to see. So whether you believe it or not, you can witness it. There's not an initiation. But for mystery cults, there would be an initiation, and the people who were not initiated generally did not know what went on. Any pagan cult did not demand solemn allegiance. The ancient gods, there were a lot of them. You could worship more than one of them. So that is different than Christianity or Judaism or Islam, where you're basically saying there's this one God, and that one God is the God I'm going to follow. I'm going to submit to. I'm going to pray to. I'm going to listen to. And there may be other gods. Obviously, they're not God in the same way, but there may be other gods, but those are false gods, and we're not going to worship them. The ancient cults didn't do that. I mean, you could be a worshiper of Dionysus, and you could also be a worshiper of Apollo, and that was fine. The mystery cults offered succor. They offered aid to people, the worshipers, especially like after you died. The idea is you have a friend in the afterworld, someone who's going to look out for you in a world that's likely to be scary and sad. Now, there was the mysteries of Demeter may have involved a little intoxication. There was that grain beverage that people drank. They drank it after a fast, and they drank it and then were in darkness, and then suddenly there were lights. So that might have had some sort of effect on their perception. But it's not really marked by that, whereas the Dionysiac cult is sort of marked by drunkenness, right? And the Theasis, this band of Dionysus followers. And the myths of Dionysus, the worship of Dionysus spreading, it gets blocked at a lot of places because people don't trust it, right? The authorities do not trust the worship of Dionysus. In the city of Pompeii, there is a villa, a house, a bigger country house, sort of on the outskirts of Pompeii, called the Villa of the Mysteries. And the reason it's called this is that there's a large room relative to the other rooms in the house. There's a large room that has a mural, and that mural seems to show some sort of initiation rite into some sort of Dionysiac rite. So it seems to be some sort of Dionysus cult that is being depicted, but we don't know the details of it. Plutarch, writes about the emotional terror of initiation because, of course, it's something sort of unusual. I would imagine that for some people, especially if they're sort of, uptight in some way, for them to go to see Rocky Horror Picture Show, their reaction might be like horror, and not horror in the sense of they're like but more horror in the sense of like disgust. Because they can't let that go. And so I imagine that initial thing, just getting people to sort of like ride this out, could be terrifying. These would have been group experiences, right? Just like the Eleusinian Mysteries, but the impact would be individual, right? So each person would feel it, take it differently. So the orgia are these rituals in honor of Dionysus. They're not necessarily sexual orgies, but orgy comes from this word. We don't have any clear evidence of what happens, again, because it's generally initiates, and if you're not an initiate, you're speaking from outside, and then who knows what you think goes on. Two key words in the worship of Dionysus: sparagmos and omophagia, or sparagmos and omophagy. Sparagmos is the tearing apart of a victim. This would be a goat in most worship of Dionysus, right? The goat would be torn apart, and then bits of the goat would be eaten raw by the initiates. The eating of the goat, of the little bit of the goat, that would be omophagia, because you're eating the essence sort of the god, right? Because you believe that the god has possessed the animal. You tear the animal apart and eat the animal. You're ingesting the god. This is a picture of one of the walls, the main wall in the Film of the Mysteries. There is a satyr-like guy, maybe Silenus, this old guy sitting on a bench. He's holding a pot of some sort. A young man is looking into the pot, and there's someone behind that, and they're all like a little bit sort of dazed by what they see. There is this figure that may be Dionysus in the middle, leaning against a female figure, it looks like. And then there's this woman who's stripped to the waist, and she is being whipped by or she's getting ready to be whipped. And then on the right, you can actually see that same figure actually receiving whips from this winged figure. So we don't know exactly what this involves, but the idea of some sort of intense physical experience like being whipped, in this sort of setting could, like if you set it up right, it would definitely have a strong effect on you. The work that we're looking at, and I'm glad to see that Maurizio in the second edition chose to actually give you most of the play. So you actually have almost the whole play. There used to be only one part of the play, one scene of the play, and that I think doesn't give you the whole picture. But this is one of Euripides' last plays. It and the Iphigenia at Aulis were both performed posthumously. Euripides died in 406 BCE, and these were performed in 404 BCE, probably produced by Euripides' son or grandson. The play opens with Dionysus coming out. He delivers the prologue, which is typical of Euripides. A character comes out and delivers the prologue, basically gives the backstory. Dionysus comes in, says, I'm from Thebes, I'm coming back home, I've been in Asia, I had to go to Asia because, of Hera's jealousy and so forth, and so I could grow up, but I'm back, and I'm here. I'm met not by followers, but I'm met by resistance. The king, Pentheus, who's a young guy, refuses to allow the worship of Dionysus, claiming it's a false religion, that he's a false god, and that his aunt Semele did not actually have sex with Zeus, but basically just had sex with some random guy, and then because of the shame involved, then tried to claim it was Zeus. He says that he is disguised as his own priest, so he looks like he's in human form. Now, gods in Greek plays, some of them would wear these large boots that would have like maybe a 4-inch, 6-inch platform on the boot, so they would actually be physically taller than everyone else. My guess is that here Dionysus comes out and he looks just like a regular guy, because he doesn't come in on a crane, or he doesn't walk in on these platform boots, but just as if he were a regular guy. He informs us that the women of Thebes, he has driven them sort of mad with desire, and they have gone off to the wilderness where they are drinking and singing and dancing. And apparently, based on what witnesses say, there is nothing sexual going on, so they're not engaged in sexual orgies out there, but they are, having a good time. Pentheus remains resistant, and he seems to be the only person in the town who still remains resistant. But Dionysus sort of gets under his skin, and over the course of the play gets him to basically dress up as a woman so he can go and watch these rituals, which suggests that deep down he really is interested in this stuff, but he's like the Puritans, right? Deep down, this stuff, they might want this stuff, but they claim they don't, right? That's sinful, and we're not sinful people, so we're not going to do it. But deep down, they really do want to do it. And then that seems to come out in Pentheus' case. Pentheus goes off. He's watching the women from, he's climbed a tree to watch them. The women look up, and they initially see him as a wild animal. Well, first they see him as a man. There's a man spying on us. Then they say, no, it's a lion. And then they attack the lion, and they tear the lion apart. And the play ends with Agave, Pentheus' mother, and Semele's sister, coming back to the palace, holding her son's head on a stick, saying, look, I killed a lion, and here's the lion's head. And then gradually she comes out of her sort of drunken state and realizes what she's done. And now she's, of course, going to go away because she can't really sort of deal with what she's actually done. So we've got joy. There's some funny moments in the play, but there's also violence, and there's a certain meanness in the play. The play is a tough play to deal with because some people read the play, and some productions of the play present this as an attack on religion. Euripides is basically saying, this is where religion gets you. Religion gets you craziness, and that's bad, so you want to avoid religion. I think that is a misreading of the play, but there are troubling things about Dionysus in this play. The reason that I think it's a misreading is this play, along with the Iphigenia and Aulus and the other two plays that were performed, won first prize in the city Dionysia 404 BCE. Euripides won first prize 4 times. This was one of 4 times. He also won the year with the Hippolytus. He won that year. But what does that say? This is a play about Dionysus. Plays started about Dionysus. That's where drama started. They were originally all plays about Dionysus. And then gradually they got to be about other things, to the point where someone said, what does this have to do with Dionysus? Right? This is supposed to be the worship of Dionysus, and Dionysus isn't even mentioned in the play. Here we actually have a play sort of going back to those roots. And it's at the city Dionysia, and he won first prize. I can't believe that the Athenians were basically saying, yeah, let's give the prize to this guy. This would be like, to me, it would be like, okay, we're going to give out a Catholic of the Year award, and we're going to give it to this priest who had a service where all he did was just talk about how bad the Pope was, and that was it. It was just all anti-Pope stuff. And it's like, okay, he certainly has a right to say stuff, but that would not be something that would be the norm or acceptable in the Catholic Church. And so for someone like that to win the prize. So that's why I don't think this is an attack on the worship of Dionysus or religion. But it ends very badly for the people involved, and especially badly for Pentheus. Here we have a red figure vase of Ino and Agave, and they've torn Pentheus's legs off. It seems like a strange way to tear him, and the tear there just looks bizarre, but you can see sort of his intestines sort of hanging there. There's a satyr who's behind, and the satyr's like totally freaked out by this, right? This is a goat guy, and he's like, no, this is just like, no, this is too far. The theory looks at rituals of inversion primarily. A guy named Victor Turner focused on the idea of liminality. Now, he was looking at the Van Gennep scheme, right, of separation, the liminal stage, the reintegration stage. But Turner decided to focus on the liminal stage, and especially in rituals of inversion, because rituals of inversion are topsy-turvy. These would be times where males dress up as women, women dress up as males. People who are ordinarily sober get drunk. People who are ordinarily fairly controlled in their behavior let go. All those things that are not normal, that's what they do. And that gives you a chance to reflect on who you are, right? If you're now looking at the other side, right? You've chosen one side, you're looking at the other side. That gives you a better way of actually considering the whole thing. And performative genres do this, right? Because they basically allow you to vicariously experience something else, right? So we can watch the Bacchae and we can maybe agree with Pentheus, right? The worship of Dionysus can get out of hand. This guy's the king, he's in charge of order, and he's got a point. But we also know where that's going, and we also so that then can experience the fear and the terror of the fact that this guy, it's going to end badly for him. So here we've got a warrior on one of these drinking cups that has eyes, and this basically is a sort of flat bowl that you would hold the handles on the side, and then you would tip it up and drink it down. So they're not like little cups that you hold in your hand like this and drink, but there's something you hold in both hands and then tip it. Okay. Dionysiac rituals and symposia have theatrical elements. There was dancing and singing at symposia, for instance, and they took place at times separate from daily routines. Dionysus is all about worship at holiday, right? These are not like your normal stuff. You're not worshiping, Dionysus because it's Thursday. You're worshiping because it's the 4th of July or it's some sort of holiday, right? You're outside your daily routine. Intellectual and emotional freedom can be emphasized in the worship of Dionysus. Because you're trying to sort of, you get yourself in a rut, and this is an opportunity for you to look outside that rut. Liminality can challenge one's identity, right? If in fact you identify as a male in a particular type of sort of macho male, and then you're dressing up as a woman and maybe playing a woman's role in some sort of like little skit that you're doing, that might make you wonder, like, what does it mean to be male, and to what extent am I performing in my daily life, right? I mean, you can start to think about those things. And Pentheus, of course, undergoes this. The excerpt comes from a piece by Eric Sapo called "Riding the Phallus for Dionysus," in which, the whole idea is that the phallus, of course, represents sort of maybe male energy, but to some extent, in the worship of Dionysus, you're submitting to this male. So if you're like a macho guy, to some extent, you're submitting to like the woman's part traditionally in a sexual encounter as the one who submits. So again, that challenges the way that you might consider yourself. The comparison section looks at a Latin poem by Catullus. In his Catullus poem 63 is the poem. But it focuses on this figure Attis and the worship of Cybele. Now, Cybele was an Eastern goddess. She's from Anatolia, from Asia Minor, from modern-day Turkey. And some think that Dionysus is not a Greek god. He is an Eastern god that was incorporated into Greece, right? And we have a story where he comes to Greece and is worshipped. Now, within the story, Dionysus claims, I'm actually Greek, but I grew up elsewhere and I'm coming home. Now, that's a different way of looking at it. Now, Dionysus' name appears on Linear B tablets. That means that the worship of Dionysus goes back to the time of the Trojan War and before. That would seem to undercut this idea that he is a new, because the worship of Cybele was taken over by the Greeks, in the 800s or the 700s. That would be ordinarily when the worship of Dionysus would come in, or just before that. But if he's in the Linear B tablets, then he's part of the Greek way of looking at things much earlier. Apollo is not named, though it's possible Apollo's in the Linear B, but he's not named as such. And so that's why Apollo, we can actually say he might actually be an Eastern god that got incorporated. The Greeks developed myths about Attis and Cybele. So Catullus 63 tells that story. Attis, who's Greek, travels to Asia Minor to worship Cybele. He participates in the ritual. He castrates himself, and then the next day he has regrets or second thoughts. The priests of Cybele were called Galli, G-A-L-I, and they are castrati. Right? They're castrated. I don't exactly know how easily one could self-castrate. I mean, it seems like it would be tough to actually pull that off, but that appears to be what they were expected to do. Not quite the way it's done in Catullus 63, where it happens very quickly while the ritual is going on, and he dances to exhaustion. And it seems like you wouldn't be dancing very long if you're losing blood, right? You pass out. But so the myths emphasize Eastern luxury and reinforce Greek masculine ideals. I'm not exactly sure if that's entirely true. Again, it challenges this. The Romans built a temple to Cybele, the Great Mother, the Magna Mater. They built this temple like in 4th century BCE. There was a crisis going on. They were told they had to do this to save Rome. They did it. But no Roman could be a priest of Cybele, because that would require the person be castrated, and that was a big no-no for macho Romans. So for the Romans, I see that. I don't see that as much for the Greek, but this is different from the norm, right? Greek men and Roman men especially are definitely not looking to castrate themselves. And I mentioned about the Magna Mater, the Great Mother, is Cybele, was introduced in Rome sometime in the 4th century BCE. she is associated with fertility, but she was brought in during like a military crisis, and this was supposed to help. And the Romans won that, whatever that military trouble was, the Romans won, and so that's sort of undergirded the idea that Cybele was necessary. For the Romans, the ecstatic, non-state sanctioned worship was viewed unfavorably. The Romans don't really like the idea of losing control, right? So, and effeminacy, like males who are not macho males, they are perceived as being Eastern, right? And Cybele is from the East, and Dionysus is sort of from the East, or he grows up there, and there's something a little bit suspicious about that for the Romans. And Catullus was a very liberal thinker. He seems to have been quite liberal in his views on a lot of things, but on this he seems to be somewhat conservative. We get in this poem, which is, I don't know, 100 lines long or something like that, within the first 10 lines, Attis has already arrived and has already castrated himself, right? That happens like super fast. If this were like a short movie, that happens in the title sequence. And then the most of the poem is the next day where he's regretting. I used to be like big man on campus. Now look at me, I'm castrated. I'm not even a man anymore, right? So there's this whole sort of questioning of sexual identity, and he doesn't like it. And then Cybele sort of scares him back to, like, it's like, you're mine now, buddy. And then he, of course, sort of, he runs away, and he's being followed by a lion. And he comes to accept that, but this really does present it as like, I don't know, that seems a little too weird. The Nachtleben section looks at Dionysus and Dracula. Now, this is, again, something that she does in this edition. She did not do it in the third edition. She had a different connection. Bram Stoker wrote Dracula in the 19th century, and that the figure of the vampire that he presents there then becomes sort of the norm. And there were episodes of vampire-related mass hysteria in Europe, right, where people thought, oh, this person's been attacked by a vampire, and now there's zombies, following in the vampire's thrall. Now, you've got a figure from the East, right? He's from Romania, right, from Transylvania, and most of the story takes place in London. So you basically have this Eastern figure in very proper 19th century England, right? So this is weird and strange stuff happening in London, and like we can't have that stuff. So it's a lot like the Catullus thing. The plot involves this guy goes to Dracula's castle. He gets taken over by Dracula. He's got a sister at home. Dracula finds out about that, and then when Dracula goes back to goes to London to claim the estate that he has bought in London, he meets Mina Harker, Jonathan Harker's sister, and then is determined to make her his bride, but he is stopped by the vampire hunter Van Helsing. The Bela Lugosi film version is a little bit different than the Stoker novel. The Stoker novel is a great read. It is an epistolary novel, so it's written as a series of letters, diary entries, telegrams, newspaper articles, and you have to sort of piece it together. And I think it's sort of a brilliant way, because it takes a while for the people of London who are writing these things. There's strange stuff going on, but they don't know why, and then it takes them a while to figure it out. Now, when we read it, even when I read it in like 1979, I think is when I read Dracula. When I read Dracula, like, I already knew the basic story, so it wasn't as much of a surprise, but it still was sort of interesting the way it's set up. It's sort of like a mystery novel. The novel was very popular. I talked about the structure. it deals with, as you get a lot of this in Victorian culture, right? You get Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, sexual repression. And then, of course, what happens when you do too much of that, it then bursts out in some sort of monstrous form, right? So if you're too prudish, what you end up is with Dracula or Mr. Hyde. You don't want that. There's also xenophobia. The British considered anyone who wasn't British to be some sort of awful foreigner. There are Dionysian themes, right? Because this figure does disrupt the normal world of London. And here we have a picture from a stage production of Dracula, and that's Raul Julia playing Dracula on Broadway. If you've ever seen the Frank Langella Dracula movie, that movie was based on the Broadway play that initially featured Raul Julia, and then I think Langella took over the role, and then they made the movie.